Hello and welcome to Kojo Filpa 480 documentary filmmaking. My name is Rob Prince, filming this in my home theater, and I'm so glad that you've signed up for this course because that means that we are kindred spirits. We're both interested in telling true stories and maybe, sharing important messages with the world and that kind of thing. So, it really makes me happy every time I see students enroll for this. That's it's the class that I came to UAF to teach, basically, and so it's the one that I'm generally just kind of hold dear to my heart, and I'm excited to see what projects you'll come up with during this semester. Documentary filmmaking is just I'm glad you're interested in it because it's an extremely rewarding and interesting pursuit. Generally, I mean, I don't know if this is important to you, but one thing that has sort of been important to me in life is having a job that other people think is interesting. I I don't know. I sort of seem to live my life as if like I'm constantly preparing for some party that I'm going to go to and have to introduce myself, and so I always want to like have the the cool things to talk about, like the cool job, living in the cool place, and all that. And so being able to say like my job is I teach documentary filmmaking and I make documentaries and I live in Fairbanks, Alaska. You know, I know I'm born and raised in Michigan, so maybe it's a little bit of a feeling of like people are generally not that excited to hear that you're from Michigan. But I've always been interested in having like a cool job, and a documentary filmmaker is a cool job. Generally, people in the world think of it as pretty neat. But beyond that, it's just it can be incredibly fulfilling because you can take a really important message, something you're very passionate about, and convert it into a documentary that you can really share with the world and help educate the world and make them aware of, important things going on or just fun things, whatever. But what's also nice about it is if you're like me and you're a person who, I have this sort of, there's a joke in the family that I inherited from my dad, this obsession with would get obsessed with a hobby for like 5 years, kind of get pretty good at it and then get bored of it. And the nice thing about documentary is you can be obsessed about something for a while, make a documentary about it, and then move on. You don't have to go on and do that for the rest of your life. You have to keep doing documentaries, so you better enjoy that. But you can change subjects and that kind of thing. And so that's one cool way to keep it fresh. I would say that documentary filmmaking is one of the easiest forms of filmmaking to get into. I think one of the reasons why I got into it more than I got when I was kind of toying when I was in college, like, do I want to go down the fiction filmmaking route or the documentary filmmaking route? And I kind of had this idea that I didn't want to have to like recruit a whole bunch of people to help me with stuff. And that's the sort of thing that you're going to have to do with fiction filmmaking. You're going to have to get a lot of actors who committed enough to memorize their lines and all that, and good actors to make it happen, and crew and whatnot. And with documentary, in large part, you can almost do it yourself. And so you don't have to rely on other people convincing other people to get on board, which to me is kind of nice, and in that sense makes it more accessible. And I've, met a certain amount of people who got into documentary filmmaking not so much because they were interested in documentary filmmaking itself, but because they were very passionate. There was a story they really, really wanted to share, and they felt like documentary filmmaking was the best way to get it out there. And there's been some very cool films made that way by people who don't necessarily have a whole ton of video production experience, and they can get away with that because audiences are more forgiving of kind of goofs and maybe some rough footage issues when it comes to documentary filmmaking more than fiction. In fiction, if the mic pops into the shot or your audio is terrible for some reason, or, the shot's too shaky, the audience is like, why? Why don't you just redo that? But in documentary filmmaking, they're pretty forgiving of that kind of stuff. So in some ways, it's allowed me to be a little less talented of a filmmaker because you can make mistakes and it's okay, because the stuff is being shot off the cuff and you don't always know what's happening where, and you're having to go with the flow of things. So it's just naturally going to be some times where stuff's a little bit rough. But we'll be talking about ways you can minimize the amount of, lousy footage you shoot in documentary filmmaking. The other thing that's nice about documentary filmmaking, in my opinion, is it can be a lot easier to find funding for. If you're really excited about a certain subject that you want to share with the world, there's probably some organization or some people who are also interested in that and might be willing to put some money behind it to help it make it happen. And if you have a fiction film, that can be a lot harder to do because a lot of times fiction films are about, you know, some particular drama between two people or whatever, and not so much necessarily issue based. And so that can be tougher. And they're just fiction is just really, really, really hard to do well. Documentary is much easier to do well. In fact, I read in Newsweek years and years ago that the kind of, I guess, somewhat unspoken rule of the Sundance Film Festival was that stick to the documentaries. So even at that level, where you're making fiction films of the quality that they're going into the Sundance Film Festival, they can be a little rough to watch. They're just really hard to do. I love fiction films. I don't want to like badmouth them, but I think it's pretty safe to say they are a lot harder to get into. If that's your passion, great. You're just going to be up against a little bit more of a hurdle when it comes to making a great film. Documentary, quicker, easier to come up with some good stuff. Also documentaries can be easier to distribute, especially if they relate to some sort of specific topic. And we'll be talking about distribution here later on in the semester. My goal in this course is to excite you about documentary filmmaking and give you the basic skills you need to make better films. You don't need to be like, in my opinion, a genius at filmmaking to make an awesome documentary. So that's one of the nice things about this field. So if you come into this class and you have no concept of how to shoot or edit a video, you are going to have a bit of a steeper learning curve there because we don't really talk too much about that. I talk about that in my video storytelling class, 280, Kojo Fulpa 280. So that's why that's the prerequisite. If you already know how to shoot and edit a video and you're pretty comfortable with that and you can capture good audio, that's a really, really important one, you're good to go. Otherwise, I'll do what I can to help you, but the onus is on you to basically get yourself up to speed on how to shoot and edit. I have all sorts of videos I've made online I can provide you with, but I can't teach you all the technical side and documentary filmmaking at the same time. But I'm more than happy to have you in the class, and if you're game for that, that's cool. I've definitely seen examples of people come in with little to no video production experience and were able to pull out some cool stories. It's more how bad you want it than how much skill you have right now. And over the course of the semester, we'll be watching some documentaries, mainly with like my commentary, because I think it's a really great way to learn how to make documentaries is to watch other ones. And so watch as many as you can, and you'll start to internalize the kind of cadence that documentary films tend to follow. And I got all sorts of suggestions for films that you can watch if you want some examples of good and maybe bad. The bad ones can be really fun to watch, and I'll make sure to include some ones that didn't turn out so well, because the cautionary tales can be just as valuable, I think, as the films that do everything right. I understand some people are, still not super thrilled about online classes, and, they miss that person-to-person interaction. I totally understand that. I do want you to know there are some benefits to taking this class online as opposed to in person. And one is that I don't have to watch the clock. For all the times that I would teach this class in person, I would just run out of time, and so there'd be stuff I couldn't teach students that I wanted to because there just wasn't enough time. Well, now I have way more time. I don't have to watch the clock. I don't have to worry about it. So the perks of that is, you're going to get like as much as I can possibly think is valuable to tell you about documentary filmmaking. The con of that is there might be more material here than you're necessarily that excited to watch. And, that's fine. Everybody has like different levels of interest in stuff. If you're If you're kind of mildly interested in documentary filmmaking, you might find that this is more more than you wanted to know. But if you're super passionate about documentary filmmaking and really want to get good as fast as possible, and this is something you're excited about, then that's a perk for you. And I like to say college is what you make of it. Just going through college doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a tremendous success in life. You have to, for yourself, go the extra mile, look for opportunities, get the most out of it you can. And so if you're really excited about documentary filmmaking, then you're going to have to, put some sweat into it and spend a fair amount of time watching stuff, paying attention, and taking advantage of this time where you can get this instruction that you're not likely to get once you're out in the real world. So I hope you'll take advantage of it. Won't take it personal if if you don't finish all the videos. That's up to you. All right, one of the important things here, let me, before I get into, let's get right to it. One of the important things here in the class is to go over the syllabus. I'm tweaking the syllabus all the time, each semester, so have a look at that. If you're not in Fairbanks and accessing our department's computers and equipment, which I'll talk about in a minute, then there are certainly parts of the syllabus you don't need to worry about in terms of lab policies and equipment policies and all that. But you want to pay attention to all the other things about how I assign grades. I mean, I can talk about that briefly. For me, I went to a pretty tough undergrad, it was a small private college, and it was challenging. And so for me, an A doesn't mean you just did fine in the assignment. An A means you went above and beyond somehow. I want to be able to reward students who really impressed me with their assignments. And so the way I assign grades, and this is outlined in the syllabus as well, is an A is for anything for an assignment that you did where you did everything I asked for, you did it really well, and you found some way to go above and beyond. And, for example, that might be coming up with something beyond what the assignment required and doing that. It might mean that if the assignment is about filming stuff, that you went somewhere special to film it, something of that nature. I don't really want to necessarily give you specific examples of how to go above and beyond, because in the real world, if you want to go above and beyond, people aren't necessarily going to tell you how to do that. You have to figure that out for yourself. And this comes from personal experience with me when I graduated from my undergrad and went out into work in the real world. I had some experiences where I was able to make a really good impression on my boss by just finding a way that I could go above and beyond what they were asking for. This will date me a little bit, but I was working for a documentary company in Chicago called Curtis Productions, and they produced a number of shows for A&E, and Bill Curtis is a pretty famous TV reporter. He's actually the narrator of the Anchorman movies with Will Ferrell. So he's very famous in Chicago, and outside Chicago, I don't know how much, but at least he was in those movies. And HD had just come out, and they had just gotten they got a camera, and they just filmed a bunch of stuff, and Sony, I think, was trying to hook them up with a camera and tapes and whatnot in order to try and get some material circulating in HD to help the HD market start to grow. And I knew that my boss, Bill Curtis, was super anxious to see this footage and get access to it. And he couldn't because he needed it converted, ironically, back to standard definition before he could watch it. And I could tell he wanted this as fast as possible. So I volunteered to spend the night at the office copying these tapes, one tape at a time, 45 minutes per tape, because they only had one HD deck. And, and that nobody suggested that to me. I just came up with that. And that's the kind of stuff that, if I had been graded, would have gotten me an A for that day. So that's why I don't necessarily want to lay out, here's the assignment, the way you should do it, but if you want to do better than that, do this. I want you to start thinking in that getting in that mindset of like, okay, well, how this is what maybe somebody's asked me to do, but I want to impress them. What's some way I can go beyond? Or this is something I'm planning on doing all on my own, but how can I make it even better somehow? So that's to get an A. B, you did everything I asked for and you did it well, but I didn't see anything beyond what I was asking for. C, you screwed something up. D, you screwed a bunch of stuff up. And F, it just didn't look like you put hardly any effort in it at all. You missed a bunch of stuff. And I do occasionally sign Fs when students just completely ignore major elements of the assignment, or they do the assignment, but they do it in just a really terrible way. So that's one of the key things of the syllabus. But have a look at the syllabus and get familiar with that, because that's kind of the contract that you and I have when you agree to take this class. You agree to that you're cool with those rules. All right. Let me talk a little bit, introduce myself here real quick. Where do we start? I started video production in 1993 as a junior in high school. I took a television production class. And at the time, I really wanted to be an airline pilot. I was actually taking flight lessons, but the flying thing kind of became one of those 5-year hobbies for me. And TV seemed a lot more interesting. I also just felt like if I had a bad day at work, I didn't want people to die. I was a little worried about the liability of being an airline pilot. You make a mistake and terrible things happen. So I transitioned into TV instead, and then basically majored in television all through college, and graduated with a communication degree in 1999. Then I went out in the workforce for a while and jumped between jobs because one of the downsides of trying to look for jobs that just seem cool for parties is that they can be terrible to do. So my first job was I was working for this really cool, documentary company making things for cable TV, and I could stick it out there and I would have sort of made it as someone who's involved in nationally produced stuff, but it wasn't really my scene. I really didn't like living in Chicago. I wasn't a big city guy. So I bailed on that, and I was just a production assistant anyway, so you get kind of beat up and treated pretty badly. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't my cup of tea. And so I quit that job pretty fast. I think I lasted 6 months there before I was like, I'm out of here. And then I went to work for the public television station in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is a pretty large market. It's, I guess, the second biggest city in Michigan after Detroit. Something, I don't know where it's at now, but 300,000, 400,000 people, somewhere getting in that vicinity. And I hated that even more. But my job was producing and directing live television, which is incredibly stressful because everything's live. You screw anything up or something goes wrong, you have to fix it right then. Everyone's watching. So I found that particularly stressful, unrewarding work. And so a job at my alma mater actually opened up to be video producer for this small private college, Calvin College. And I had loved working in that department when I was a student. So this was my dream job. And it was good for a while. I was basically doing everything, shooting, directing, editing, all that kind of stuff. So it was good experience and, broadening things for me. But I knew that what I really wanted to do at that point was become a professor. And so I began working on my master's degree at Michigan State University. And what was interesting to me about that experience was in my undergrad, I had really great professors. These professors took their job incredibly seriously. It was really rigorous and challenging and just an incredible example of how to teach. Unfortunately, at that time, they were not very well equipped for the technical side of video production. So I learned a lot about theory and media literacy, and I teach a media literacy class and a history of cinema class and that kind of thing here at UAF. But I didn't learn a lot of the technical stuff. I was self-taught on, and that stinks. And maybe some of you know how that goes too. Being self-taught, you make a lot of mistakes. And one of the problems I had was I would look at my footage and know it didn't look like the stuff I saw on TV, but I couldn't say why. And that was extremely frustrating for me. So I went to Michigan State, and I found the opposite there, which was kind of bizarre. I wasn't super impressed with the teaching at that time. Now, that was almost 20 years ago, so I'm sure that things have changed. People have retired. There definitely were great professors there. But at the time, I wasn't the one professor in particular I had was kind of phoning it in, and I'm sure he's gone now. But I wasn't thrilled with the caliber of teaching. But the tech I learned was incredible, and it filled in all of these holes that I had had as undergrad. And so finally, I had these two things in one. I had good understanding of theory and behind video production, and but I also had the technical understanding as well. And I wanted to become a professor because I thought I want to be the kind of professor that can do both. Who is passionate about teaching and takes it seriously, and is not phoning it in, but also understands the technology and can share that as well. And so that's what got me excited about teaching. And I've been teaching at UAF. UAF was my first full-time faculty teaching job, and I picked this up in 2005. And so it's working out pretty well. I definitely recommend teaching if at the professor level if it interests you at all, especially video production. It's a great way to go. You're not like begging for grants and money all the time to try and make documentaries. Like, you have a a solid, reliable job with summers off. You can work on productions if you want, and the credibility that comes with being a professor, and health insurance, which you may not care about now, but you're going to care about at some point. And yet you also still have the freedom and resources to make documentaries. So that's worked out well for me. One of the beautiful things about video in general, though, is you've got this pool of skills that can apply in all kinds of different jobs, which worked out well for me as I was trying to figure out what it is I wanted to do. So I could work for a documentary company that produced things for A&E. Hated that. That wasn't for me. Took those same skills, moved them in to be a producer-director for public television. Hated that. Went on to become, the media producer, whatever they called me, for the video production department. Enjoyed that for a while, but it got old. Then went into becoming a professor. Never had to go back really to school for anything. I mean, to become a professor, I had to get the master's degree. But, a lot of people go to college for something and then decide they hate it, and they end up in a field completely different. And a lot of what they learned in college doesn't apply to that new field. That's kind of a bummer. And the beauty of video production is there's a lot of different jobs that can suit a lot of different personalities that still tap into the same skills. So that's one of the cool things about it. Now, I'd like to get to know all of you here in the first week of class as well. So for this week in the discussion, I'd like you to go in and talk about your experience with video production, what kind of stuff you've done. If you've got examples of what you've done, you're welcome to include links to that. And then talk about your documentary project ideas for this semester, because you'll be working on one documentary idea for the whole semester, and in the end we'll just show those films. So it's whatever you decide you want it to be, and it's okay if you don't have an idea right now. That's one of the things we'll be working on the first couple weeks here. But if you got something that you're already like, this is a topic I'm super passionate about, and I'd really like to make a documentary about it this semester, tell me about it. We can give you some feedback on that. Let me talk to you just as on that subject a little bit about what making a documentary is like. And it's a lot like writing, a book, I would say. It depends on the size of the documentary. Maybe this semester it's more like a research paper. But you have to have a very specific idea in mind for what you want to cover. And we'll talk in more detail about this later and in pre-production. And it has to be something that's really doable within the semester. And I would heartily recommend not biting off more than you can chew. There's a very common problem I've seen among students and others in video production, where you have wonderful, grand plans that you're going to make the Citizen Kane of documentaries or whatever it is, and then you start to get started and you realize things are not going the way you want, and you get bored of it, and you've made it you've come up with the idea this is going to be such an amazing thing, there's no way you could ever possibly achieve that, and it never gets finished, or it never gets made, or it's terrible. So I would rather see you do a short and really solid documentary than something massive. So something down the lines of 5 to 7 minutes, really, really well done, with a lot of variety of footage, and everything's well mixed and audio is recorded well and all that. And it's a great, interesting story, rather than something that's like 30 minutes, which some students have done, which is just like a lot to go through and try and do in one semester. That said, you want to, life in college is about making mistakes. If you want to decide, I am doing a half-hour documentary, I don't care, go for it. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. Mistakes are how we learn. And maybe it won't turn out to be a mistake. We've had some really successful films in this class that I didn't think had much of a chance of working out. And the other thing is, sometimes at the end of the semester, you end up with something that's, good and definitely impressive for the semester, but could use a lot of work. And in that case, after the semester's over, I can help you with those tweaks, and we can see about maybe getting it into festivals, getting it broadcast, that kind of thing as well. So the main thing that I want you to keep in mind when you're thinking about this subject is you have to be extremely passionate about this. And I know sometimes that can be hard for people to find a subject that they're that excited about. I can help you with that, and we'll be talking more about that as well. But this topic should be something that you're not, like, researching it is not work for you. If you dread researching and making this thing happen, that's not going to be a good subject. If that's like a job for you, like, I make a task list every day for what I'm going to do, and I have like the work list and the fun list. If researching this is in the work list and not in your fun list, find something that's in your fun list. Find something like you just can't get enough of this topic, and pursue it that way, because doing the background research is really important for a lot of documentary subjects in order to do the film well. So yeah, make sure you're super excited about something. If you're, for example, if you go into a bookstore, which I don't know anybody does that anymore, or go to a library, what subject of magazines would you gravitate toward, or what book would you want to look up? That kind of stuff. I'm sure there's something we can find that you are super excited about, but it doesn't always like leap to mind right away. And when you're new to documentary, it can be hard to tell like what's a viable subject anyway. So we'll be talking about that as well. Now, for those of you who are in Fairbanks and would like to use the gear that we have, I've got information for you. For those that don't, it doesn't really apply, but you're welcome to listen in. We have computers you can edit with the software you need to edit. We have all the gear that you would need and more to do cool video filmmaking. Well, what you will need if you're going to use our gear is an SD card and an external hard drive, and just the biggest and fastest of both that you can find if you don't have any. If you have specific questions about it, you can ask me, because that stuff's changing all the time. So there's not much point in me telling you what would be good right now, because it could change next week. But those are the two things that you would need to have. And then we've got plenty of cameras, tripods, lighting gear, all sorts of cool stuff. If you do want to use our gear, there will be a fee, equipment fee. So if you're interested in that, just let me know and we can fill you in on how much that would be. It's usually, really modest compared to the amount of gear you're getting access to. If you don't have access to gear, that's fine. There's, you can totally shoot a documentary on an iPhone right now, or a smartphone, I should say, and edit it on a basic computer. You can even technically edit it on a phone, but doesn't sound like fun to me. And there's some extra gear I would recommend that you get. So if you're going to go that route, let me know. Audio gear mainly, and definitely maybe a tripod conversion, because it's really important to be able to film on a tripod. Maybe some lens adapters as well. So I'll have some information on the website about gear that I recommend for that. But yeah, totally practical to shoot on a smartphone. I actually record narration for my podcast on my phone right now because it's easy. And nobody said anything yet, so we'll see. So anyway, welcome to the class. I think that's the very basics of the semester. And again, have a look at the syllabus, because there's a lot in there that changes in terms of how your grade is broken up and the different assignments that we have in the class. But fundamentally, this class is going to teach you documentary filmmaking from kind of the producer director side of things. So not so much the tech side. And there's plenty to talk about and lots of stuff I've learned the hard way that I'm going to share with you over the course of the semester. So any questions? My email's in the contact information on Blackboard. Otherwise, it's rob.prince@alaska.edu. And thanks so much for signing up for the course.